what I've learned from Carl Jung, and this video isn't going to be directly my lessons from Jung, but the lessons I've learned that have been birthed from Jung's train of thought and the different theoretical modalities that have been birthed out of Jungian thought, and also how his ideas have infiltrated my life in kind of a very subtle but fascinating way to make me live a more integrated and healthier life. And Jung has been probably the deepest influential thinker alongside Peterson, and I'd probably say Buddhist train of thought, so the Buddha. They're probably the three influences that my the information I consume come from. And Peterson kind of led me to Jung in a way, because he was deeply entrenched in Jungian thought, but he wasn't a Jungian thinker. So he really liked Jung, but he definitely wasn't a Jungian analyst, or I'm not sure how complex or deep he went into Jung. But he was very well read, and also in Nietzsche as well, which I've not really ever got into Nietzsche. But yeah, when I think about Jung, it was through Peterson, and then through reading Murray Stein's Jung's Map of the Soul, and then getting into Jungian psychology, transpersonal psychology, integral theory, and then diving more deep into modalities, internal family systems that have kind of been birthed from Jungian train of thought. And so at the core axiom of kind of all the ways I perceive the mind and how to utilize that into my life and to live in a better life, but also a deeper understanding of my psyche, it kind of derives from Jung. And so I thought it'd be an interesting video to make of what I have learned from Jung so far. And I'm probably only about 2 to 3 years in, being more entrenched into Jungian thought. I definitely don't understand Jung in terms of having a firm grasp of him, but I definitely have a more than beginner's understanding of his psychological theory and his orientation towards the structure of the psyche and how the power of the unconscious. And I don't want to dive too much into it in the introduction, because that's what I'm going to do in the video. And so I think the first lesson I've learned from Jung that comes into my mind instantly is learning the power of the unconscious and the fragility and the submissiveness it takes to listen to that and dialogue with it. I think we, especially from a westernized mind, we come at the world as we're in control. We come at our psyches as we're in control. We dictate how we think. We should dictate how we feel. And if you look at like the personal development, self-improvement scene, this is what most of it is. It's like positive psychology. It's like you can gain control. You look at cognitive behavioral therapy. It's like you fix your own mind. You fix the pathological symptoms of negative thoughts and negative emotions, and you come from a place of authority, and you look at your psyche, and you dictate how your psyche is and how it constructs itself. And you're kind of the creator, not just of the world in terms of your actions and your habits and the things you create, but also the inner turmoil of your psyche. If it's like negative, it's like you can fix that. If it's positive, then that is from you. And I subscribed to that train of thought, and it was more like this ego control. It was like this identity of who I thought I was in control, and it could shape my psyche. And if there was bad thoughts or emotions, it was my job to discipline myself out of that. It was my job to build a strong enough will, build a strong enough identity to overcome the negative thoughts. And it was like these negative thoughts and these negative emotions were splitting off one core, which was me. That was a structure. That was who I was. And I could fix things from that structure. And when I didn't fix things and when I didn't get things right, it was because I got lost in the negative thoughts that were sprouting around. And that's kind of, in the essence, I felt like I had control. And then I started reading Jung, and Jung quite eloquently, has a lot more eloquent than I can say the word, describes the power of the unconscious. And this is not just Jung's idea. This was deeply entrenched in Freud and maybe thinkers before, like Schopenhauer and I don't really know who else it derived from. There was the idea of the unconscious was kind of in the air way before Freud, but Freud was the first person to like articulate the power of the unconscious. But Jung really elaborated and enlightened me to the fact that you are in very little control, and your psyche is this vast ocean, and your ego, your awareness, is just this little boat that bobs on the surface of the ocean. And beneath it, and you can think of Freud's iceberg theory as an iceberg, you only see the tip of it pointing out. Beneath it is this whole structure of this big iceberg that is like deeply entrenched into the ocean. And with Jung's more Jungian metaphor, with the boat just bobbing on the ocean, and the ocean being the unconscious. And we are just, and in the bottom of the ocean, there's sharks, there's dangerous sea animals, there's waves that are coming to topple over the boat, and yeah, we are this small pinpoint of awareness, and that is all we have. All we have is our little boat on the sea of the unconscious. It's kind of like a little light in a dark room. And Jung had a dream about this. It was like he realized that the light he was carrying was it was his self-consciousness. It was him that was the thing that was shining a light to the power of the unconscious, and it was bringing awareness to the field of being, in an essence. And when I talk about this, I think of the Adam and Eve story, when Adam takes a bite of the apple, and well, Eve does, and then she influences Adam, and then they become self-conscious, and God walks into the Garden of Eden, and they're ashamed because they're both naked, and they're afraid to show themselves to God. It's like that is the first level of self-awareness. They've separated from everything being continuous, everything being one, and they've been able to pull themselves away and become individual. And that was the first birth of self-consciousness described in the biblical series, in the biblical narratives. I'm not saying that's exactly what happened, and that could have been a process of evolution, for example. Like you look at apes, or you look at dogs, you look at primates, that they don't have the level of self-consciousness that we do. They don't have that individual ability to sit there and separate ourselves from the instincts, separate ourselves from thoughts. But humans have this incredible ability to like pull themselves away and to observe things, and we can detach, and we can look at nature, we can look at the things out there, and we know we're something here and there's something out there, whereas no other creature in the whole of the universe, or we know, not saying there isn't any aliens, but nothing else can do that. It's just humans, and that is self-consciousness. We are self-conscious, and the self-conscious is that little ego, it's that little boat that is floating in the sea of the unconscious, and it's the little light that you carry in the dark room. And the whole goal, and what I learned from Jung, was we need to increase the size of that boat. We need to solidify it so it's stronger, so it's not leaking, it's not capsizing. And then we need to increase and build out and expand our awareness into the unconscious, so we can integrate more, so we can be aware of more. And to do this, you need to have a firm ground in reality. You need to have a firm setting of where you are in the world, and then you need to be able to reflect inwards into the unconscious and to look at all the powers that may be. But that was the first thing I learned from Jung, was that we are just this small boat that's floating, and your ego is just this thing that it needs to be strengthened. I remember reading Murray Stein's Jung's Map of the Soul, and I had this like do you ever read something and you get like a really mind-shattering feeling? It's like, whoa, I've been perceiving something completely wrong for my whole life. And growing up, being more into, since I was 18, being more into Eastern approaches of philosophy, where Buddhism and the New Age kind of practices, I had this idea, and I look at it now, and I think I interpreted the idea of Hinduism and Buddhism wrong. But it's more to kill the ego. It's more to like, we need to shut that ego and repress it, and that voice, that narrative of who we think we are is false. And so I always had this idea that like, I need to kill the ego. I don't want to strengthen it. I don't want to make it bigger. I need to kill it. I need to like push it down to the floor. It needs to not be a thing. That is what's causing me suffering, is attachment to mind. But when I've read Jung, and he described in Murray Stein's Jung's Map of the Soul, he described how Jung thought of the ego. It was like the ego is awareness. Ego is this thing that we're born with that is self-conscious, and to make it more conscious is to grow it, is for it to be stronger, so it can hold more, so it can be a mirror that reflects back the contents of the unconscious. And to do that, it has to be strong. It has to have a firm holding. And you think of people that have like multiple personality disorder or schizophrenia or psychosis, It's like that ego structure that they hold, that sense of being something, that being solidified in the world is weakened. It's not strong. And so the contents of the unconscious, of the psyche, spill upwards over self-consciousness. And then we run off primal instincts. We run off the archetypal energies that sit within the unconscious. We run kind of without our control. But that ego is awareness, and it allows us to integrate and notice things, but then act how we deem is responsible and proper in the world. And so I remember really reading that and thinking, yes, that's it. Like, the ego isn't a bad thing. The ego is something that is essential for it. It's what the labels of what make us a human. It's what makes us self-conscious, and we need to make that stronger. We need to be able to reflect back more of the contents of the unconscious. And I think the second lesson I've learned, like going on to that, is I keep saying the contents of the unconscious, is that the more I read Jung, and I've had this experientially throughout my life with experiences through meditation and social anxiety, is that the mind speaks in symbols, and it is multiple. The multiplicity of it is, there's not one thing. It is fragmented and scattered into loads of things. And there's a collection that makes our psyche, not just one pinpoint of mind. And I think when we think of the unconscious, or we think of the mind, we think of this one thing. We think of it like sprouting out of one thing. But as I read more Jung, and he talks about like complexes and subpersonalities and the images of dream symbols, I'm like, there's energies that live within the unconscious that are constantly operating and that are constantly moving and influencing consciousness, our self-consciousness, to act and to be in different ways. And so the unconscious is alive. It's not this dead place where memories get repressed and where energy gets stored. It's like this, it's an alive being in a sense. It's kind of, the unconscious is the material of what makes self-consciousness, of what makes us conscious. And without the unconscious, we wouldn't be here. The unconscious is the breeding ground of consciousness. And so it's an alive thing. It's something that is evolving and changing, and it's flux. It's constantly moving. And these energies that are running around in the unconscious and are operating in the unconscious, they can be dialogued with. If you can, to a certain extent, get to a point where you have a strong enough identity in the world and an ego, and you can hold that still, you can then look back into the unconscious and speak to the energies that sit within there. And Jung has different layers of how we see in the mind. He's got the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious, and all these different separations of unconsciousness. They communicate with you at all times. And examples I can think of is like daydreams. Like when you're just sat there and you're driving to work, or you're sat in a line waiting for something at a supermarket, your mind drifts off somewhere and it creates these images, it creates these symbols, and all of a sudden you'll get this, like, you might see someone you know, and you might get this whole image play out of you going and speaking to them and like having a dialogue with them, or you might get a random memory pop up from something, or something that reminds you of something, and you get these whole other memories. And so the unconscious speaks in this visual imagery way. It can speak in thoughts. Like, thoughts can come out of like, I feel anxious, or do I look ugly today? They can come out in feelings. Like, the unconscious manifests itself in like images and symbols and all these different ways. And what you have to realize is these things aren't just these thoughts, these images, these emotions. They're not just random things that arise within the mind. They come from somewhere. And so we don't just want to look at the content of them. We want to try to get to the point of, where is that coming from? What part of me is feeling like that? And when I say part, I mean because the psyche is fragmented. It's full of different personalities. So when emotions or symbols or images arise within the mind, thoughts, it's like, who is behind that? What is the energy behind that? And Jung's taught me to be really curious around the contents of the unconscious, whereas I think Eastern mysticism and Eastern ways of thinking, they try to get you to ignore that, ignore the dialogue, ignore this, ignore that. I think Jung, in a sense, brought me more into a curiosity of, right, I've got to hold myself in the world, but also be curious around the contents of the unconscious, because there's something trying to speak to me. What is my mind trying to communicate to me? And dreams and active imagination are huge ways that you can get into the dialogues with the unconscious. And this is something else I've learned from Jung, is the power of just sitting down and listening to what your mind brings up to you. It's like dreams, for example. Dreams are one of the only times where, well, the only time really where your self-consciousness gets shut down, and there's certain parts of your brain regions and also your awareness just shuts off and it goes off to a different level and everything quiets down. And when that quiets down, when your ego awareness, your ego structure's quiet, what happens is the images of the unconscious emerge, and they play out these dramas and these myths and these like fairy tales that come up as dreams, and you have these mad dreams of all these characters doing these crazy things, and they're showing themselves as like your old science teacher and your mum's there, and then some girl you spoke to like 20 years ago, and it's like all these different characters and these images are coming up and they're arising from somewhere. They're becoming into awareness through the dream state. And it's like, what is that trying to do? Is that just like randomly on purpose? No, is that just random? Is there no purpose behind it? Are they just random images, or is there some meaning behind it? Is there some greater wisdom within your unconscious that's trying to tell you something, that's trying to get you to integrate something? It's the same with active imagination. Like, if for those that don't know, active imagination is a technique that Jung came up with, which is to like go into the dream state whilst you're awake. And he did this by digging a hole so in his mind's eye, you would do some yogic breathing techniques. Maybe it's like just focusing on the breath really quick, or just doing like a box breathing or whatever. And then he would get to the point where he was still enough where he could vividly imagine within his mind him digging a hole, and he would keep digging a hole or climbing down some stairs until he would get to like a chest or a door or something, and he would open that, and then he would dialogue with his unconscious, or he would picture the dream that he just had and go and dialogue with the dream characters and let that dream unfold as he is conscious. And through that, he was bringing his ego into the dream world and dialoguing with the concepts of the unconscious and seeing what they want and how and what do they need. And I think that's what it's about. It's about creating relationships with the different parts of you. And this is something I figured out when I had social anxiety. It's like I was trying to cure social anxiety by just like meditating and ignoring when the feelings would come up, just noticing it and then coming back to the breath. But I realized that was just this very subtle form of repression. And so I was getting really good at noticing social anxiety, stopping it and then going. And then it was feeling like it was going, but then all of a sudden it would just emerge out of nowhere again in different situations. And I never felt like I was getting to the core of understanding what it was. I was just noticing the symptoms and then coming back to the breath. But as I started asking myself, and this was before I even read Jung, I was like asking myself, like, why is this social anxiety coming up? What is this symptom from the mind? Where are you from? What do you feel like? I was speaking to it as it was a person. I was showing curiosity and empathy towards it. And then it revealed itself as it's an alive entity. It's a live being that sits within my mind. It's like a child that's within me that's hurt and emotionally scarred. And then through that, I started realizing that it's not just social anxiety where there's a part of me. There's all these different parts of me. And you start building up a kind of diary of all these energies and these people, like in essentially sub-personalities, fragments of your identity that live within your mind. And Jung came up with the idea of complexes, which was essentially that. They're a cluster of energy that have been formed from an experience, and they've fed off that experience and got evidence from future experiences, and and it's embodied itself as an energy within you, and it acts within you. And when something in the external world triggers a complex, he calls it constellates, that complex can override or surplus ego consciousness, and it can run your life. And an example I can think of this is like, if you've got an addiction, or if you're really hungry, you see the eyes of the world of someone who's hungry. If you're anxious, you see the eyes through the world of someone who's anxious. You're different with different people. I speak to my girlfriend differently than I speak to my brother. I act and work differently than I do in the gym. And there might only be slight differences, but there's roles we play. There's energies that we have, and there's sub-personalities within the structure of our psyche. And a lot of healing for me has been integration of these sub-personalities. And if anyone's looking for a really good book on this, there's a really good book called Internal Family Systems by Richard Schwartz. And there's also another one called Embracing Ourselves by Emma something. I can't remember. Just type in Embracing Ourselves and you'll find the book there, because I thought they were very helpful for learning how to dialogue with your sub-personalities. And I think that's really important, is to talk about the images, like how the unconscious speaks in images. It speaks in symbols. And these symbols have been shown through thousands of years in religion and in mythology. And essentially when religion and myths and gods have been worshipped and put out into the world and have had a following throughout all the span of human history, they've not come from actual entities. They've come from inner representations that have been externalized. Humans have this tendency to want to personify things. We want to create things and make them real. And so these archetypal energies that sit within the mind, that align within the structure of the unconscious, make themselves out into the world, and they create themselves as symbols. So you look at the mandala, it's an ancient Tibetan Buddhism practice, but that's been out throughout human history. People go on massive psychedelic trips and see mandalas within the psyche, like all these symbols, the Christ symbol. These are all representations in Jungian thought of inner energies. And the idea of an archetype, this is another thing I've learned from Jung, is like archetypes, how there is common patterns in the human existence that we all show and we all have within us. And we think of that of like, there's the god for lust, there's a god for anger. We all can embody the energies of anger. We can all embody the energies of lust. Like, these are all deeply encoded human patterns. Like, where have they come from? They've been evolved throughout thousands of years, but the energies seem to be imprinted into our psyche. And so there's encoded genetical ways of being within humans that we're all capable of. And we can all access them at any time, and they can be integrated and become aware of. And I think that's been shown biologically in the way that new genes can be activated at different times. It's like the genes sit there within the structure of our biology, but they don't ever get activated until we need them to. But the archetype, the process of that structure sits within us. The DNA, the information is within there. There's a psychic imprint that's sitting there, and it's just waiting to be activated. And it's like, if you might not think you're an angry person, but if you have to get in a situation where you have to fight or something gets thrusted upon you, like, that anger will be activated, and that is an archetype. It's an instinctual response, right? Because we do have instincts, but there's also psychic responses, and they're the archetypes. The archetypes are distinct from instincts, but they're psychic responses, and we all have them. And when you can really get aware of archetypal energies that sit within you, you get to a very primal source of energy, a very like clear source of energy. And people can be encoded, or they can be enthralled by bad complexes, by bad archetypes. One I'm thinking of, and another lesson I've learned from Jung is the puer aeternis, which is the eternal youth. And if you look at the story of Peter Pan, who's the boy that just lives in Neverland and never ages, there's an archetype, there's a pattern of young men who refuse to age, who refuse to mature. And Jung called this the puer aeternis, the eternal youth. And there's common symptoms within someone who has that complex, who is enthralled by that complex, and they play out them patterns. And Jung was very he was very good at critiquing and clearly seeing the patterns in people, and realizing that they come from deeply embedded structures within the psyche. And it's been extremely helpful for me to be able to understand that and name certain behaviors and name certain symptoms and go, wow, where does that come from? And it's really enlightening. The next thing I've learned from Jung, and I'm sorry if this video is a bit kind of over the place. I'm just thinking, like, Jung has actually learned me a lot more than what I thought he did. The next thing I learned from Jung was the shadow and how to work with shadow contents. And for those that don't know the idea of the shadow, it's that throughout our human development, we learn to repress certain things to fit within the culture and to fit within the norms and to build an identity. For example, like when you see a toddler, he doesn't have control over his anger. If someone takes a toy off him, he gets mad and starts like punching the floor. But if you do that when you're 13, if you do that when you're 22, it's a completely different conversation. It's completely different. You get looked at funny. So throughout the developmental process of your personality being developed, you learn that, right, okay, when I throw a tantrum, I get shunned upon. People look at me weird. So I'm going to throw that. I'm going to put that energy to the back of my mind. It's going to go into the shadow. And this is essentially a very important thing, because it's what helps us become human. It's what helps us operate in society. And without a shadow, without the idea of the repression mechanism, we would all just be instinctual drives constantly, having no sort of control over anything. But you also have this shadow that works in another way, which is like, your parents might see you as someone who shouldn't be successful. They don't want you to be successful, or they see you as stupid, or they see you as whatever way. And through their development and through their growth, they have certain ideas of the world and how people should act. And if you've been brought up by your parents in a way, when they see something that could potentially be good, but it just doesn't fit within them, they could shun you for that. And you learn to repress that because you're not getting the empathically mirrored back from the world. And so your parents will see you through the eyes of who they are. And if you don't fit in with the eyes of who they are, they will cultivate you, and you will repress your emotions and behaviors that contradict who they are. And so you can see how society as a whole kind of gets influenced into certain ways of thinking and being, because if you don't fit in with the norms, if you don't fit in with the culture, you get shunned upon. And when you're younger, you see that people don't respond well to that. You don't get a good response to it. So you learn to put it in your shadow. And a lot of good can be put in your shadow. A lot of truth. And I just think of, first of all, like the masculine problem of men shouldn't cry. Men shouldn't be in touch with their emotions. We learn from a very young age as a man. It's like, don't be in touch with your emotions. You can't be emotional. You can't cry. And like, how many men can't cry? Like I barely cry. Like this is a thing that is built within humans. Throughout the whole span of human history, we've not been allowed to feel our emotions because it's been shunned upon. And so that becomes a repression. It becomes like a collective shadow. And that sits within your shadow. It's like the emotional side of you, the feminine side of you. And if you unlock that, there is so much more energy available to you. There's so much more feeling, so much more wholeness. And we become fragmented because we repress things, and we have defense mechanisms that stop us from being aware. And I think it is vitally important that we can do shadow work. And that was a big part of Jung's the shadow work. The shadow concept came from Jung, and it was a big part of his psychology. And I want to leave just with a quote that I always say on the podcast before I finish. And it's, if the path beyond you is clear, it's probably not yours. And you've probably heard me say that loads and loads of times, but that encapsulates, for me, it encapsulates what I've learned from Jungian psychology. It's to really step out my own way and to who I think I am and where I think I should be going is not as important as who I am right here and what I'm adapting to. And I need to learn to listen to the wisdom of the unconscious and let that influence me, but in an integrated way, as much as this idea of who I think I am, because that idea of who you think you are can just be a neurosis. It can be this trail of energy that's like stopping you from living life. It can be a fear of life. And it's an escape. And you shouldn't be interested in who you think you are. You should be interested in who you are. So thank you very much for listening, people. Hope that was a helpful podcast, and I'll see you all in the next video.